Guys, hope everyone's doing well. Boxing Gossip here. I haven't been recording as much as I usually do in the past few weeks. Life has very much caught up with me. Had a number of things land on my plate at the same time with work and family and other boring stuff. So I won't bore you with the details. But I haven't gone anywhere. We're still going to do the podcasts every Wednesday night at 8:30, and hopefully in the next few weeks we should get back to normal service being resumed on the channel. And I wanted to start by doing a review of the Eddie Hearn and Matchroom show at Wembley Arena this weekend. Now I've got to give a huge shout out to an individual who sorted me out with some tickets for that event. You know who you are. And yeah, it was a really good night. Enjoyed myself. Took my younger brother along with me, and yeah, we had a really good time actually. So massive shout out to that individual, and wanted to sort of talk through the card a little bit actually. So we arrived at the arena probably around and about 5:30. So we missed Charlie Edwards, who I think must have been the first guy into the ring. And I understand that Charlie Edwards won by a third round stoppage against an overmatched opponent. Obviously Edwards was coming back after his world title defeat against Casemiro, so probably just giving him a little bit of a confidence builder. We also missed Craig Richards, who won by stoppage over Bronislav Kubin, again seemingly an overmatched opponent, but yeah, by all accounts those two guys did fairly well. I think we kind of saw some of the Felix Cass fight. I think it was only a 1 or 2 round fight, but yeah, I didn't have too much to say on that one. So a number of fights that I did want to talk about and give a brief overview on. Let's start with Danny Dignam, who made his debut against Jimmy White, who was 0 wins, 3 losses. Now Dignam, highly accomplished amateur, had a lot of support in the crowd. You know, a lot of the support for Danny Dignam was a lot louder and a lot noisier than some of the fighters higher up the bill. So this is a guy who potentially will curry some favour with Eddie Hearn. Obviously he's an Essex boy. Matchroom are very big in that part of the world, and it looked like Danny Dignam was selling a lot of tickets and his support were being very vocal. And he looked pretty sweet in there against Jimmy White, I've got to say. Now Jimmy White, you know, obviously he's lost every fight he's been in. He looked tiny in compared to Danny Dignam, and he didn't really have anything to offer in terms of making the fight competitive. So got to qualify it that this was a performance at a certain level. But nevertheless, you know, Danny Dignam he put his punches together very nicely in there. You know, he didn't just coast, he didn't just look to take it easy on his debut, he looked to put on a performance, and when the crowd started singing his name, you could see it getting to him, and you could see him raising the pace, and you know, he put punches together very nicely and made a good debut, stopping his opponent. So yeah, don't be surprised to hear that name, Danny Dignam, come up a few times more on this channel. He looked like a decent prospect, and wouldn't surprise me if we see him have 3 or 4 fights in quick succession and potentially start to make some waves. Obviously, you know, it's going to be a performance it's going to be a performance against an opponent at that sort of level, and you know, we'll find out more about him when he steps up. But you know, you could tell just by looking at the guy that he had some class in there. So certainly a prospect to follow, Danny Dignam, if you haven't heard of him before. Elsewhere on the bill, Ted Cheeseman versus Lloyd Ellet. This was a decent step up for Ted Cheeseman on paper. You know, Cheeseman was 6-0, Lloyd Ellet 20-1. Again, you could see in the ring there was a natural size difference there. Ted Cheeseman perhaps looked like a weight class bigger. But early on in the first round of the fight, Lloyd Ellet was possibly getting the better of the action. I thought Lloyd Ellet was pretty tricky. I thought he was boxing quite nicely, and I think he picked up the first round against Ted Cheeseman. The second round was more competitive. Cheeseman was starting to walk him down a bit more. Cheeseman was starting to impose his size on the fight, and he caught Lloyd Ellet very nicely. Ellet went back to the ropes. I personally believe the referee should have called a knockdown, and you know, because the ropes were keeping him up, and that Lloyd Ellet should have maybe been allowed some time to recover. Failing that, Lloyd Ellet maybe should have used his experience and taken a knee, but that didn't happen, and the referee had to jump in as Ted Cheeseman sort of moved forward and put the pressure on Lloyd Ellet. So an impressive performance from Ted Cheeseman on paper. You know, it was only his 7th fight and he stopped a guy who was 20-1 with a very, very early stoppage. Looking at Ted Cheeseman, he's obviously an accomplished fighter at some sort of level, and I'm sure he's the kind of character who could get to some decent level within boxing. He put his punches together quite nicely. He had good patience in there. You know, he didn't get frustrated. He didn't panic that he was losing the first round. He stuck to his game plan, and he was logical how he went about it, and he was patient. So I do give him credit for that. Looking at Cheeseman in there, I didn't think we were looking at a world level prospect, and I'm not saying that he's being billed as a world level prospect, but to me he didn't look like the kind of guy who was going to go on to superstardom. He was a bit upright. His approach was a bit telegraphed. He looked, I don't want to say one-dimensional because that would be quite harsh, but he certainly looked like he had his method of going about business. Whether there's versatility there, I don't know. You know, if he was against an opponent who was giving him different looks, wherever he could reinvent himself, mix it up and bring a completely different look, I'm unclear. Fundamentally, I was slightly unclear after seeing the fight if Lloyd Ellet was actually the better boxer in there. It's just that Cheeseman caught him because he was the superior puncher and a bigger guy. So, yeah, I'll be interested in seeing Cheeseman again, definitely. Slightly sceptical as to how high he'll go. Similar comments actually for Reece Bellotti. Now, Reece Bellotti fought Ian Bailey in his 8th fight. Bailey's 13 and 19, so he loses more than he wins, but he's a very tough, durable opponent. He's been in with everyone. He's been in with Selby, he's been in with Frampton, I believe he's been in with Josh Warrington, and Bellotti boxed pretty smart in there actually. He won every round as far as I'm concerned. He had good hand speed, he put his combinations together well, his footwork was very good, and he made Bailey look very, very basic. You know, he was able to sort of carve open Bailey's defences and land on him repeatedly with scoring punches. So, fair play to Reece Bellotti. That was a decent win. Again, looking at him, and this is a kind of harsh thing to say, but sometimes it's more of an instinct when you look at these fighters. You're looking at these prospects, you're seeing them undefeated going up against known competitors and contenders like Lloyd Ellet, like Bailey, and you're thinking to yourself, how is this guy taking care of business? Is this the kind of guy who's looking like a world champion elect? Is this the kind of guy who looks like a British champion elect? And Bellotti's young, he's obviously early stages in his career. Obviously you can't write a guy like that off. But again, did I watch that fight and be left with the impression that we're looking at a surefire world champion here? Possibly not. Eddie Hearn, after the fight, was saying that he was looking to move Bellotti towards a British title end of 2017. So obviously they're going to move him at a sort of medium pace. You know, they're not going to be overly ambitious at this stage, and they're looking for a British title in a year's time. And I think potentially that experience will stand him in good stead. Moving up the card, I'm trying to make sure I don't miss anyone out. So Jake Ball versus JJ McDonough. Not a good fight for Jake Ball here. Ball was 7-0, McDonough 13-3. The fight was fought at light heavyweight. McDonough, I'm told, typically plies his trade the weight class below at super middleweight. I was told McDonough took the fight on 5 days' notice. I was told he had to dehydrate substantially to even be able to make the light heavyweight limit. And in the ring, he did not look in good nick. You know, Jake Ball was, in sort of very, very good nick. And McDonough on the opposite side of the ring was the complete opposite. You know, he looked like a guy who hadn't been in training camp. You know, let's put it that way. It was a textbook fight of a guy not knowing what to do when he's hit. McDonough caught Jake Ball early on in the fight, and Jake Ball staggered back to the ropes. That was probably 20-30 seconds into the first round. And to be honest, from that point on, Jake Ball never recovered. At one point, McDonough sort of forced him, punched him, pushed him, and Jake Ball actually went back over the ropes. Took him a while to recover. The ref let him fight on, and McDonough then sort of threw a lead hook, caught Jake Ball straight on the chin, and Ball was down. You know, I was pretty much ringside, and I was I don't know, 12 foot away from Jake Ball on the way when he went down, and you could see his eyes. You know, his eyes were gone the second that punch landed. It was a really, really chilling knockout. I was speaking to a few of the guys ringside, and they were saying that Jake Paul had been knocked out like that before in the amateurs. So this isn't, overly a good sign. You're getting stopped by a guy who typically plies his trade in the weight class below. JJ McDonough doesn't actually have the best knockout ratio even in the weight class below. So it's a fight that Jake Paul would have been a substantial favourite over, and if he's getting knocked out like that, it's going to be hard to come back from. People are going to want to be fighting Jake Paul now. He's not going to be someone people are running scared of. They're going to think if you put the pressure on him, if you hit him on the chin, he's going to fold. He's not going to have the resilience to stand up. So we'll have to see. Eddie Hearn said afterwards that they were going to rebuild him. They were going to put effort into, bringing him back and giving him a few more fights. So, we'll see if that happens. But it was a brutal knockout. Moving up the card. Carson Jones versus Ben Hall. Now Ben Hall, massive at the weight, massive at the weight. I heard he struggled to make weight the other day, and that is not a good sign when you're in against a guy like Carson Jones. This was a big step up fight for Ben Hall, and you kind of know what a guy like Carson Jones is going to do. He's going to be tough, he's going to be in your face, and he's going to grind you down and grind. And yeah, Ben Hall struggled for me to deal with Carson Jones. Early on, he was picking up the early rounds with his boxing, but you kind of got the impression that Carson Jones was happy with how the fight was going. His tactic was more about dragging this guy into deep water, taking him to places he hadn't been before and grinding him down. It looked to me, I haven't seen the Sky broadcast, I haven't seen the commentary, so I don't know what the commentators were saying. It looked to me, from my position at ringside, that Hall had hurt his hand. Every time he threw his hand, he was winching. He looked like he was in pain. I think later on in the fight, he was also indicating that he'd torn a shoulder or dislocated a shoulder or something like that. And I believe that was on his other side. So, if you've got a bust hand with your left and a bust shoulder with your right, or, whatever it is, it's not a good combination. Regardless, Carson Jones was coming on very, very strong. And Carson Jones was putting in some good work. And I kind of feel that this was a step up too soon for Ben Hall. Carson Jones, don't forget the trouble he gave Kell Brook. Don't forget the trouble he gave Brian Rose. Carson Jones, very, very experienced guy, underrated guy. And for me, against a prospect like Ben Hall, it was too early. I don't necessarily blame Eddie Hearn. People are saying Eddie Hearn threw him to the wolves. A guy like Ben Hall, it's a difficult one for Eddie Hearn. Like, what do? Do you just constantly spend money bringing over journeyman opponents to put him at the bottom end of bills? I mean, Hall isn't a superstar name. Hall, he's not going to sell tickets to headline events. It's hard. So Hearn's rolled the dice with him. He's put him in a meaningful fight that could have got him somewhere. And to be fair to Eddie Hearn, there's been criticism of him. There's been criticism of him on my podcast. But if you actually look at this card, there was quite a few upsets or fights that didn't go the way that was expected. Obviously, Jake Paul, Matchroom prospect, got knocked out. John Wayne Hibbard, who we'll come to later, again a Matchroom fighter, got knocked out. Ben Hall got stopped. And then, there was another fight actually earlier down the bill. Jack Healy, who was a 1-0 prospect, who lost on points to Chris Adaway, who was 5-23, so a journeyman. I personally felt Healy won the fight. I felt Adaway didn't do enough to get the decision, but the referee sided with Chris Adaway, and Healy didn't look good in there, to be fair. He was really struggling with his distance and the awkwardness, and he was, he had no jab of note, and he really struggled to make an impression in the fight. But nevertheless, there was some competitive scraps on the bill. Moving up the card, let's talk Katie Taylor briefly. Katie Taylor filled the arena with excitement. She was electric in there. The hand speed was there. The punch variety was there. She looked like an exciting fighter to watch. The opponent, Karina Kopinska, who I believe had a losing record, didn't offer very much in there in terms of offense. It wasn't like that she was looking to throw something that could catch Katie Taylor and hurt Katie Taylor. But nevertheless, she was durable, and she obviously had some experience. I think she'd had mid-20s number of fights, so it wasn't a terrible debut for opponent for Katie Taylor. And Katie Taylor performed with immense credit, and certainly she made a believer of me sitting ringside. I would definitely Watch her again after that. I'm someone who's been sceptical of women's boxing in the past. Not because I don't think women should be allowed to box, but quite frankly, I don't really enjoy seeing women getting hit and getting hurt and getting bust noses and stuff. But having said that, Katie Taylor, what she brought in there was exciting to watch. It was very, very skillful, very snappy, and I would certainly watch her again off the back of that. She's an exciting fighter, so credit to her for that. The main event of the evening, Ohara Davies versus Andrea Scarpa. For me, this was the main reason I went to this bill. A huge fan of Ohara Davies. Actually, really, really impressed by Andrea Scarpa when he fought John Wayne Hibbard. I thought this was a big step up for Ohara Davies. I thought stylistically this would develop into a good fight. You had the long, rangy opponent in Andrea Scarpa. You had the sort of explosive, unorthodox type fighter in Ohara Davies. Now, I was told that Andrea Scarpa hadn't actually ever watched Ohara Davies before this fight, which I thought was very, very odd, because Ohara Davies is the kind of fighter who takes you a good while to work out. So if I'd have been Scarpa, I'd have been watching Ohara Davies extensively. Davies is a Matchroom prospect. He's fought on Sky. I'm sure if you typed, and I haven't done this, but I'm sure if you typed Ohara Davies into YouTube, you could find footage of his fights. So I think that was a poor error. And for Andrea Scarpa, it was a critical error, because Scarpa is a very ABC boxer. Scarpa only brings one look to the ring. He jabs, he moves, he uses his range. And Ohara Davies succeeded early on in taking Scarpa's jab away from him. Scarpa couldn't land his jab, he couldn't find his range. I felt, not that he was ever looked like he was going to get stopped, but I felt he felt the power of Davies and was put back in his cell. And the fight became a terrible, turgid affair. It went 12 rounds. The arena was pretty dead for parts of the fight. You could hear a pin drop. I was sitting, let's put it this way, I was probably 20, 30 seats away from Nigel Benn. I got to meet Nigel Benn, get a photo with him actually, and he's a gentleman. But what was funny is Ben was shouting advice to Ohara Davies, and you could hear it clearly ringing out across the arena, because nobody else was saying anything in the arena. The atmosphere died for that particular fight, possibly because a lot of the crowd were there to see Katie Taylor and they left after her fight. But that fight really killed the atmosphere, unfortunately. Now, Ohara Davies won every round against the guy in Andrea Scarpa who I rate, and against the guy who was a very, very stern test at this stage of his career. And I have to give Ohara Davies an immense amount of credit for that. Having said that, the performance from Davies was not what I was expecting and was not what I was hoping for. There was a real lack of going through the gears from Ohara Davies. One thing that did impress me about Davies was his jab. He has real oversized reach. Davies he's not a big guy. He doesn't have a big frame compared to Andrea Scarpa. Scarpa looked a much taller, rangier bloke, but Davies has good reach, and he was using his jab effectively, and it was putting Scarpa off. But what Davies wasn't doing was doubling up the jab. He was just throwing it at the odd time. At times, Davies struggled to find his range. It was an awkward fight, and I kind of felt if he'd stepped in behind that double jab and then thrown one of the big power punches he likes to throw, he could have really got him out of there. Davies was very single shot heavy, and actually, whilst there are some highlight punches that he did throw, there were rounds at a time where he's going when he was not connecting with anything. He was very, very single shot heavy. He was leading with these unorthodox overhand punches. He didn't go to the body as much as I liked. The one time he hurt Scarpa was when he went to the body, and I think he should have continued that theme. The jab was effective, but he didn't use it enough. A learning fight for Ohara Davies. He proved that he is above and beyond an Andrea Scarpa. At the same time, he proved that there is still a lot to work on. I saw an interview with him after the fight. He said he wasn't tired. Obviously he knows better than me, but sitting where I was sitting, I felt he did look tired. I felt, and it's no mistake being tired. This was his first time beyond 6 rounds. He had to go to 12, and he had to go against by far the best fighter he'd fought, so he should be a bit tired. But I just felt Davies became a bit frustrated. He became a bit predictable. He became lower volume, and I felt he spent too long looking for a highlight reel knockout where he should have been. I guess the best way of summing it up from my perspective, there were times in this fight, Ohara Davies was all style, very, very little substance. When he threw a jab of substance, when he went to a body of substance, it worked. But there was too much. There was too much of the style for me, and not enough substance. One other fight I just browsed over, so I should quickly mention Martin Ward versus Ronnie Clark. I had the fight wide for Martin Ward, actually. I know the judges had it quite far up on the scorecards, quite close on the scorecards, but I had it relatively comfortable for Martin Ward. I thought Martin Ward looked a level above in there. Ronnie Clark, it was quite a frustrating performance. He was actually quite effective when he turned it on in the later rounds and put it on Martin Ward, even dropped Martin Ward. But I felt Martin Ward, when boxing on the outside, was quite comfortable and allowed to dictate. What I thought was poor tactically from Ronnie Clark was, one, he only started pouring it on when it got to rounds 9, 10, 11. Two, he allowed Martin Ward to box from the outside, and he tried to box on the outside with Martin Ward, who's not only a bigger man, a rangier man, but a far more accomplished amateur background. So I felt tactically it was a very poor fight from Ronnie Clark, and to me, Martin Ward did look a bit beatable in there. You know, when Ronnie Clark pulled it on in the end, he was catching Martin Ward. Ward was becoming fatigued, which again does happen over the course of a 12-round fight. Had he switched it up earlier, had he moved inside earlier, and had he not tried to box from the outside with the amateur boxer, could we have seen an upset? Yes. Martin Ward's a good fighter. He's got a lot of attributes. He's another one of these guys. I've said it about a few of these guys on the bill. Ted Cheeseman, Reece, Bellotti. Am I seeing Martin Ward as a world champion? I'm not. There's vulnerabilities to his game. I think he's British champion already. I'm pretty sure that Ronnie Clark, it was actually a British title fight. So he's already performing at that level. It's going to be a hard transition for me, for Martin Ward to go from British to European. I feel he's a bit vulnerable. I feel if people take the reins from him and pour the pressure on him, he's potentially a guy who will crack. But he's unbeaten now. I think it must be 18 fights. He's British champion, and he boxes very, very nicely from the outside. So credit to him for that. The final fight in the bill, John Wayne Hibbard versus Martin Geffen. Real scrap, blood everywhere. Wayne Hibbard was pretty carved up. It wasn't pretty to see, I must admit, and Geffen stopped him. It actually looked to me that Geffen knocked out Wayne Hibbard, and Wayne Hibbard was on his feet. His eyes seemed to close when he was standing up, and then Geffen hit him a couple more times and dropped him, and the referee was right to wave it off immediately. You know, John Wayne Hibbard's a warrior. He's a nice guy. He's the kind of guy who has been a credit to boxing, but fundamentally he's been in a lot of tough scraps. You know, there's miles on the clock. I think Wayne Hibbard would have beaten Martin Geffen a few years ago, and now he's not the fighter he once was. I see Eddie Hearn has alluded to the idea that he should retire, and frankly, I would support that if Wayne Hibbard wanted to do that. I just feel at this stage Wayne Hibbard is more opponent than contender, unfortunately. So there we go. I hope I haven't missed anyone out. That's a run through of the major bill, and it was a funny bill to watch. I guess if you were watching this on TV, and I haven't watched it on TV, but I guess if you were watching it on TV, you may say it was a bill where the fights didn't really catch light. You know, where the fights were a bit drab. You know, I could see the Martin Ward fight being drab. I could see the Ohara Davies fight being drab. Funnily enough, when you were actually there, and we were there from the early stages, you know, there were some real good fights. You know, the Cheeseman Lloyd Ellet fight was good when it lasted. The JJ McDonough versus Jake Ball fight, it was only a round, but it was one hell of a round. I enjoyed the Carson Jones Ben Hall fight. I thought that was a good fight. I liked seeing Danny Dignam. I liked seeing Katie Taylor and those sort of guys. So there were a few people to watch out for. Ohara Davies, I still believe Ohara Davies can make it. I still believe he can make it potentially at world title level. But there still needs to be a lot of work there. Let me know your thoughts, people. How did you rate the night? Were you at the stadium? Were you watching on TV? Let's talk about some of these prospects. Are they going to get to British title, European title, world title? Am I being harsh on someone? Am I being generous to someone? I hope you've enjoyed the overview. As always, please hit subscribe. Please give me the thumbs up. Appreciate it, guys, and I'll catch you all soon.